Okay, so I'm pretty sure Arcane will be a series to be remembered. Everyone who's watched it knows that. But what makes it a series that will withstand the test of time? I mean, from the very start, they were at a disadvantage. Their creators, Christian Linke and Alex Yee, were literal noobs when it came to making an animated series. But fast forward 6 years later, and you have one of the most critically acclaimed video game adaptation series of all time. And you know what? It's even united both critics and audiences alike in a favorable light. Now, that's a feat in and of itself. I mean, with the media right now, it's either one or the other, but not with Arcane. Everyone agrees it's a great show. Now, you might be thinking I'm exaggerating, but that only means that you haven't watched the show, which you should. I know that there's a stigma with animated media and how it's for kids, but this is the exact show that shows the advancements of animation as a storytelling and artistic device. To give you a better idea of what I mean, let's talk about some of the reasons why it will be remembered. A big factor, of course, is animation. I mean, right off the bat, Arcane gives you an awe-inspiring view of Piltover, one of the settings in focus in the series, and it's jaw-dropping to say the least. It gives you a taste of the animation that's going to be used throughout the series, and it's a feast for the eyes. Now, you might have noticed that it's not entirely 3D, but it's also not entirely 2D as well. Now, this was a very risky decision from the start. I mean, if you're familiar with some anime or even cartoons that have done this, it hasn't always worked out for them. This just shows the immense amount of trust the creators had with the vision of Fortiche, the Paris-based company that animated Arcane. Now, how will animation make this one of the most memorable series out there? Well, it's because they blended the 2D and 3D elements so expertly that they made it into a visual revolution. I mean, from my research, what they did wasn't exactly new, but it's their execution that elevated it way up there. I mean, one look at the aesthetics of Arcane and you'll know that it's from Arcane. From the characters, to the settings, to the use of graffiti and doodles, all of it just screams Arcane. The great thing about this is that 10 years from now, you can rewatch the series and still be in awe of great art. And it's not something only fans can enjoy, it's something a lot of new animators can learn from and emulate in the future. What's even better is that the style actually lends to the tone of the story and the fleshing out of the characters. So the animation is really doing more than just one thing. Now, despite everything that the animation does for this series, it's not the only thing that will make it memorable. If you're a sci-fi or fantasy fan, I'm sure that you've noticed the great world building in this series. From a world building perspective, the first time you see Piltover, you'll notice that it's a steampunk paradise full of space, brightly lit environments, and with plenty of resources for everybody. But within minutes, they pan down into the Undercity, giving you that jam-packed feeling of the lanes, where establishments and homes are built right on top of each other because of the lack of space and resources. Now, this is a subtle but expertly executed juxtaposition of both cities. And this kind of thing is just made possible by great world building and great writing. I mean, everything in Piltover is brightly lit and full of lively colors, while in the Undercity, it's perpetually covered in neon lights, mostly in green, purple, or pink, where dark shadows lurk around every corner the lights don't touch. So both cities gives you a different feeling whenever they're in focus. And those are just the aesthetics, but again, it's the execution that elevates all those things. So it's something that fans will remember and students of the craft can learn from. Now, this doesn't even cover the effects of Piltover's hex tech and the Undercity shimmer on their respective environments, which is also part of the great world building. I mean, it's simple in its execution, but man, that simple execution does a lot for the world building. Now, indirectly, it also tackles gender, races, and all those things, but in this world, there's an automatic disconnect with ours. I mean, it's not that much as to antagonize or paint a completely different picture of what we know in our world, but the discrimination and inequality is in context with their own world. So everything here is just what their world needs. So the world building is pretty much covered in a lot of ways, much like Avatar: The Last Airbender or even Adventure Time. Of course, this is for an animated series. I mean, you can't compare its world building to what a Tolkien or a Sanderson would be known for. That said, it takes a really good writer to pace a show in a way that the viewers always feel completely immersed. After all, this is a Netflix show, and while it was released in acts, these shows are meant to be binged. If not for the first time, the second time. Trust me, I know because I've watched this series many times, and each time I watched it, I just wanted to go on and on and on and on and on. So to fit all that happened in Arcane and all its multiple storylines into 9 episodes, that's another feat in itself. Now, talking about storytelling and its story, I think that it's going to be a better experience if you went into this not knowing anything about the game. And you know what? I think even LoL players would encourage you not to play the game. Just watch their animated stuff. It's pretty cool. Now, like I said, going in blind is probably the best way to enjoy it. This is because Arcane is a very character-driven story, and what they did well with is that they take their time building up the characters, making you empathize with them and even resonate with them in a way that will make you watch the series even more. Now, this is something mostly creatives can learn from. I mean, one of the driving forces of any story are its characters. If you have great characters, chances are you have a great story. But if you're a fan watching it, you yourself feel immersed because you can relate to the characters. Now, what's pretty impressive is that for a Netflix show, the dialogue is pretty solid. I mean, even when they're info dumping, it sounds so natural that you don't even notice that they're info dumping. So it doesn't take out the immersion at all. Now, you always hear about showing and telling in reviews, but the thing is, it's not always great to be shown everything. At the same time, it's not always great to be told everything. There's a great balance in the middle, and Arcane balances pretty well. I mean, like I said, each character has a backstory, and with that backstory comes a flashback. Now, the thing with flashbacks is that sometimes it breaks you out of the immersion or the flow of the series. With Arcane, you can watch the backstory and just feel as connected in the present as you were with the backstory. Now, that's a pretty hard thing to do. So again, it's not just for fans to enjoy the whole series. It's something that creators can once again learn from. Another thing they can learn from is that the setups and foreshadowings were done really well. And when one thing happens, it just clicks. You don't question it or think that it just came out of the blue, and that's because of the great setups throughout the series. So what that does is that it gives you a great feeling of a payoff once they do come out because you notice those small details. Also, for a show that's handling some pretty heavy themes, they did it quite well and tastefully. I mean, they have war crimes on the side, they have depression, they have mental health issues for their characters, but they never force it to be darker than it should be. I mean, they don't even have to rely on shock factor to keep the viewers immersed or stuck to the screen, much like some other series I know. I mean, let's get to the meat of what makes Arcane great. It's characters. Like I said, it's a character-driven plot, so take away the characters and nothing happens. So the great thing about this is that nobody was static. Everybody was smart and capable, and you don't get those Walking Dead vibes where somebody does something stupid for something to happen. No, it's just the natural flow of things in the world. Each character is distinctly their own. They're not all brawlers, they're not all inventors, they're not all politicians. But at the same time, the show subverts this in a way that you don't have to be brutishly big to be strong. Or do you have to be covered in academic accolades to be smart? Even with how the show handles gender, powerful women can come in all kinds of body types and walks of life, but that never stops them from showing how capable they are, nor how strong they can be in their own ways. A great example of this is Caitlyn, Vi, Jinx, Mel, you name it. All the women in this show is very powerful in their own way, and it doesn't take away from their femininity, much like popular media does these days. Now, this all comes around with a great world building, as I mentioned earlier, because the environment shapes them. Now, to flesh all these characters out, that's a pretty hard thing to do again with only 9 episodes. But they did it. I really want to talk about this more, but honestly, it's gonna take a whole other video to make this. When it comes down to it, what I really want to say is that you can resonate with all these characters because you can see how well-intentioned their choices are, and how often they are twisted by the world around them. The characters are organic, they have clear motivations, and they act accordingly. Their personalities influence all their decisions, so in a way, even though they're presented with the same problems, they react to it differently. But at the end of the day, you still understand why they did that. Let's take Jace for example. For however smart he isn't capable of seeing the perspective of somebody from the Undercity or Zone. On the flip side, you see the same thing with Vi and Jinx. Now, this makes for a very interesting conflict, but at the same time, they didn't have to bend over backwards to make these kinds of nuanced characters. characters. What they did is very simple. It's cause and effect. Put it simply, characters react a certain way because of their personality and their environment. That's it. Anyway, that just shows how well crafted the characters are. They're all very likable, antagonist or protagonist. And what's interesting is that they aren't really in-your-face personalities. And that in itself, I think, helps you understand the characters themselves because you aren't antagonized by them. You don't build this wall between you because you can understand all their motivations and where they come from. And again, that all comes to execution. It's something fans can enjoy, and again, it's something creators can learn from. So to answer the question, why Arcane will be remembered, it's simple. Arcane will be remembered because of its great execution. Animation, story, characters, world building, everything was fleshed out in a way that they complement each other. And this kind of product doesn't come easily. You can tell the time and effort the creators and the animators poured into this. They poured their hearts and their souls into this. And it's something that fans will definitely enjoy if you do that, and it's another thing that creators of a future generation can try to emulate. I mean, everything in Arcane just feels alive, and it's great that we have this point of reference for fans and creators to base their standards on. That's why it's going to be remembered. It just raised the bar so high that fans want more of this content and creators want to emulate it. So again, Arcane will be remembered and will be used as a reference point to show the impact of animation on sci-fi and the fantasy genre, and by extension, the people who enjoy it. By the way, I almost forgot. From what I gather, there's this divide on whether the music was good or bad, whether it was on point or it was just plain distracting. Well, for me, I think it was on point. I talked about the animation of the series and how it drove the feeling and tone of the story. But the same goes for the music as well. Still, if you feel differently, leave me a comment down below. I want to hear your thoughts about it. Also, if you've noticed, my review is very, very positive. But know that there's no perfect media out there. So even Arcane has its flaws. I hope you can check out the comment section down below to see what I think the flaws are. But anyway, thanks for listening, and peace, and have a great day.